I thank the representative of Cuba for her statement, and I now call upon the permanent representative of Saudi Arabia to deliver a statement.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
سيد الرئيس أود.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I'd like at the outset to congratulate you upon your presidency of the Security Council's work for this month. And of course, I wish you every possible success. I'd also like to thank you for having convened this open debate regarding the situation in the Middle East. And I'd like to thank His Excellency, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of your country, friendly country, for his presence and his presidency, and for presiding, rather, over part of the work of this session. And I'd like to thank the Secretary General of the United Nations for having briefed us. President, I'd like to congratulate all the countries who have held seats on this council this year and wish them every possible success in their work. Allow me, sir, to turn to this august council and to address to you my gratitude for your very honorable position, that of condemning firmly the barbaric aggression against the embassy of the United Kingdom in Tehran and the consulate in Mashhad. And we hope that the Council will continue to ask the government of the Islamic Republic of Iran to respect its legal international commitments as far as the protection of diplomatic missions is concerned, and to prosecute all those responsible for these types of attacks, including those who incited, planned, and carried out these acts. It's not enough to just make statements in apology. No. The delegation of my country would like to state that the Palestinian cause remains at the very heart of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's interests. And regardless of the challenges, regardless of the difficulties which are ravaging our part of the world, none of this will deter us, none of this will prevent us from standing side by side with the Palestinian people in their resilient stand against the Israeli occupation and its colonial practices, as well as violations of international legitimacy. President, we have come here to this council, and we have done so repeatedly in the past, and every time we have asked you to condemn the official terrorism carried out by Israel, and to condemn the crimes committed by its colonial army and its terrorist settlers, starting with the methodic assassinations, settlement, Judaization, ethnic cleansing, all of which are crimes of war and crimes against humanity. All of this has been documented in the United Nations reports. All of this is taking place with Israel worrying about nothing and no one, and being accountable to no one. Israel continues the use of force, deadly force against Palestinians, continues to exploit Palestinians, to torture them, including women, including children, and adolescents. The Israeli war machine continues to deport Palestinians, to seize and confiscate Palestinian lands, continued settlement policies, by ignoring any of the legal consequences of this, without being accountable to anyone and without fearing anything. The Israeli authorities continue to Judaize Al-Quds al-Sharif and the Islamic and Christian sites, the historic Islamic and Christian sites, and continue to attempt to erase the Arab identity and to change the historic situation of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the esplanade of the mosque without being accountable to anyone. Israel continues to defy the will of the international community and continues to build the separation wall. It also continues to exploit the resources of the Arab Golan, currently being occupied, and the illegal trade with the goods and produce of Israeli settlers, built on occupied Palestinian lands and occupied Arab lands in brazen violation of the ICJ and various United Nations resolutions. The unfair blockade imposed by Israel, the occupying power over the Gaza Strip, continues from year to year. This is compounded by Israeli practices and the arbitrary practices in the West Bank, which have led to a deterioration in terms of poverty and the absence of any possibility for decent life for Palestinians. All of this without being accountable to anyone or fearing anything. Mr. President, we will always remind your Council of its responsibility and its duty in making Israel responsible for what it does and asking it to account for the crimes of war which it has always carried out. We ask you again to set up an international protection regime for the occupied Palestinian state, including Al-Quds al-Sharif, pursuant to the 4th Geneva Convention and the resolutions of international legitimacy. We also call upon you to take immediate necessary steps to safeguard genuine opportunity for peace and the solution of the two-state solution, and call upon Israel to cease any settlement policies and the confiscation of Palestinian land, and also call upon Israel to implement all political, security and economic agreements which they have signed but never implemented. We also ask you to back efforts aimed at setting up a timeline for the end of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands and the rest of Lebanese lands under occupation, as well as the Syrian Arab Golan, and to withdraw to the borders of the 4th of June 1967 until a last and fair peace is achieved pursuant to international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative to ensure that the Palestinian people be able to enjoy its independence, build its independent state. The Security Council of the 5 last years was not able to discharge its duty when it comes to the protection of the Syrian people against the killing, the terrorism and genocide carried out by the Syrian authorities against its people, and which have claimed over 300,000 victims. And led to the displacement of over 12 million Syrians and destroyed the country. We regret that the Security Council was not able, despite its repeated relevant resolutions, found itself able to lift the Madaya siege and the other cities which are currently besieged to ensure that humanitarian assistance reach inaccessible regions, leaving over 400,000 individuals under the threat of famine. And this brings us back to a situation which could rightly have been one in the Middle Ages. We look at Madaya and we see how human beings have become living skeletons. These pictures should lead to increased humanity in us. These images need to move mankind, and we have seen how efforts undertaken to exert pressure on the Syrian regime have led to an opening up of partial access to humanitarian assistance to certain besieged regions. I believe that it is simply unacceptable that the international community is forced to exert pressure on the Syrian authorities to meet the nutritional and medical needs of its own citizens. What the Syrian authorities are doing here is inhuman and is commensurate with a crime of war. We confirm our condemnation of any types of sieges and blockades, plunging the population into hunger. The authorities behind these crimes, and we remind you that 12 of these cities, of the 14 cities which are besieged, are under the Syrian government's control and their allies, Hezbollah, and criminal gangs. And we would like to state clearly that the volume of humanitarian assistance is simply insufficient and is not an alternative to forcing the Syrian authorities and their allies to immediately lift the sieges on all cities and villages in Syria. Mr. President, we see no path forward in resolving this humanitarian disaster other than through a political solution based on the Geneva Declaration and the two Vienna Declarations. We'd thus like to reaffirm our support for the envoy, Staffan de Mistura, and for his mandate pursuant to the resolution which calls for the total and complete implementation of the Geneva Declaration and a launch of official negotiations for a political transition phase. We also back efforts aimed at implementing a ceasefire pursuant to Resolution 2254. This in parallel with political efforts, and to take steps towards the implementation of the ceasefire following the implementation of the first stages of the political transition process under the aegis of the United Nations on the basis of the Geneva Communiqué. We're also going to continue our work through the Syria Support Group to ensure a political transition pursuant to the Geneva Communiqué and Vienna Declarations. The position mandated by the International Support Group has attempted to bring together a broader range of the opposition to determine their representatives in the negotiations and to determine their positions without foreign interference. The Syrian opposition and various of its factions and various of its groups at the conference in Riyadh were able to unify their positions, and this was a very important step on the path to identifying a political solution to the Syrian crisis. We'd like to pay tribute to the efforts undertaken by the Syrian opposition, and we're going to continue our absolute support for the Palestinian people unconditionally to achieve their needs, achieve their yearnings, meet their needs, while preserving the unity and sovereignty of Syria, regardless of their faction and where they come from.
I thank the permanent representative of Saudi Arabia for his statement.